Hi everybody. Just waiting for a couple more people to join, I think. Good evening and welcome to the Bristol Break Up Club this month, December. We're going to talk about Christmas this month. The Bristol Break Up Club is a small and welcoming club set up to help people who are going through separation and divorce. Run by Stowe Family Law, the largest family law in the country, I think. And they're represented here today by Amy Langford and excuse me, Rachel Fisher. We're also joined by Stephanie Bedis, who is a financial planner that we work with regularly, who helps people to sort out all their finances on divorce. And I'm Claire Macklin. I'm a breakup and divorce coach, and I work with Stowe to support their clients through divorce and beyond. So if you would like to ask any questions during the session, then please do use the Q&A function or the chat function at the bottom of your screen. Just bear in mind that if you use the chat function, unless you just send it to panelists, your name will appear. So make sure that you choose whichever function you would like. So let me get cracking. I'm going to introduce myself first. I'm going to share the screen. There we go. So yes, so my name's Claire Macklin. I was Claire Black. I've just changed my name post my second divorce. I'm a breakup and divorce coach. I'm a master NLP practitioner and a former lawyer. I'm twice divorced now, and I'm also the mum of 2 teenage boys and the author of a book, Break Up from Crisis to Confidence, which you can see behind me in the picture. And if I can make my slides work, there we go. You can see a copy there. It's available on Amazon or via my website. So the aims of the Bristol Break Up Club are to help you to concentrate on you rather than your ex, to become calm, to get clarity, to focus on what you can control rather than what you can't, because that can be really frustrating, to see options and choices, to communicate more effectively, and ultimately to create a vibrant future. Those are kind of the pillars that all of my coaching follows in everything that I do. So today I wanted to talk about Christmas. Now, I know from my own experience that Christmas can be a really challenging time for anybody who's separated or divorced or is going through a divorce. The media doesn't help. It bombards us with images like this of kind of perfect families with smiling children, with amazingly beautiful Christmas lunches spread out over a massive table. But for those of us who are going through a separation, it isn't always like that. And in fact, for those of us who are married, it isn't even always like that. You know, these media representations give us a very kind of skewed, perhaps, expectation of what Christmas is supposed to be like. And I know that thinking back over the Christmases that I spent when I was first divorced, I remember feeling quite worried, quite anxious, maybe sometimes a little bit depressed, not sure what the arrangements were. And I remember being really scared of being on my own at Christmas and feeling really lonely. And for the first couple of years afterwards, especially the first year that my children were with their dad for Christmas, I found that really hard. Since then, I've been remarried and divorced again, and I've had loads of different sorts of Christmases over the last 15 years, and I'll talk about some of them in the session today. Last year, I spent Christmas on my own for the first time ever in quite a few years, and all of the strategies that I'm going to talk about today I used last year to help myself to work my way through that Christmas. Ultimately, I knew that I essentially had a choice. I could let it get me down, or I could find new ways to enjoy Christmas. And I want to share with you some tips and questions that you can kind of ask yourself as we go into the festive season, whether you're spending time with your ex or whether you aren't, whether you're planning on time alone or whether you're going to be surrounded by other people. Hopefully these questions will help you to reframe and perhaps shift your perspective. And I'll tell you some client stories and things along the way as well, just to illustrate how these questions can work in practice. Ultimately, if there's one thing that you take away, my key message is that although Christmas may be different once you're divorced or while you're going through a divorce, and those changes can be challenging, whatever your reality is, you always have choice about how you respond to it. First thing that I always talk about with my clients when we talk about Christmas is to acknowledge how you feel. And Paul McKenna talks about emotions being like messengers knocking on the door. If you squash them down, they come back again and again, louder and louder, until eventually they burst through that door. So it's really important to look at your feelings and acknowledge them. And you can kind of, to take that metaphor a bit further, you can decide whether you want to invite those emotions in for tea or for dinner, or to stay for the night, or just to come in for 5 minutes. It's always good to name your feelings. Naming them will take away some of the power that they have over you. So start to notice perhaps what it is that you're feeling. Are you feeling sad? Are you feeling angry? Are you feeling afraid or fearful? And acknowledge and accept that that's how you feel. And sometimes you can look beneath that as well. So anger, for example, if you look beneath the anger, because anger is the kind of outward expression of that emotion, maybe underneath you feel criticized or betrayed or resentful or furious or annoyed, or any of those other words that are on there. It's really worth looking into and thinking about how you feel. Perhaps write about it, journal about it, or talk to yourself in the mirror about how you feel, and think about how strong those feelings are out of 10. So mine around Christmas by myself were that I felt a bit anxious, I felt nervous, I felt afraid of feeling lonely if I didn't have things to distract myself with. And perhaps you feel something completely different. Whatever you feel, know that it's okay to feel that way, and be kind to yourself. And a strategy that I often use with my clients to help them with their feelings and to then deal with those feelings is to help them ride the wave. So when you feel a wave of emotion perhaps coming towards you, find somewhere quiet where you can sit, or even lie down if you can, and imagine that you're a surfer and you're paddling out to meet that wave of emotion as it comes towards you. And as that wave of emotion gets closer and closer, imagine yourself turning your board and you're going to ride the wave to the shore. Allow the wave to get closer without fighting it, and name it. And then turn your board and ride that wave in the direction that's already going in your imagination. It's moving towards the beach. Waves always move towards the beach and they always break on the shore. So just allow yourself to feel without resisting it. And it will come and it will go. Some waves will be bigger, some waves will be smaller. And as the emotion that you're feeling begins to die down, and it will, imagine that you're coming towards the beach and you're going to land on the shore. And just imagine that that wave breaks and you can land on the soft sand. And then breathe slowly in and out, feeling that sand beneath your feet and the sun perhaps on your face. And imagine yourself drying off in that sunshine, resting for a few minutes. Allow your breathing to return to normal. And then notice how it feels now that that wave has passed and you're on the shore and you're safe and you're warm. And that can really help just to ride those feelings through, and allowing yourself to know that those feelings are transitory. They will never stay forever. They always come and they go. And you can start noticing how big the waves are too, because over time those waves will probably get smaller and smaller. The next thing to do is much more practical. So plan ahead. Certainty really matters when you're going through a divorce. So plan, plan, and plan. So if you haven't got your Christmas plans in place already with your ex-partner, maybe it's time to start. If it's going to be tricky, you'll have time perhaps to take advice and talk to your lawyer if you need to. So I would advise you also to be clear on what it is that you want and why, and keep your communication really factual rather than emotional. So one way perhaps to take back your power might be to put a proposal forward to your ex-partner and for them to perhaps come back with their comments on. It means that you're not on the back foot. And then once you know what's happening, then plan ahead for that time on your own as well. And I'll have some suggestions for that a bit later on in the session. If you can agree on presents for your children, then brilliant. If not though, know that that's okay to buy separately. Be aware if your partner has, or your ex-partner has sort of previous form. I had a client once who wrote all her ideas and all the ideas the children had given her onto a big piece of paper, and then sent that piece of paper, a copy of it, over to her ex-husband, and he then bought all the gifts on the list, which meant that she had nothing left. So if your ex-partner has previous form for doing things like that, then maybe keep some things back and send just some of the ideas across. And then for me, it's all about reframing how you feel at Christmas. So some really useful questions that you might want to ask yourself. What won't you miss? So ask yourself, if there was one really good thing about this situation, what would it be? What won't I miss this Christmas? Perhaps you no longer have to put up with your father-in-law or something like that, drinking too much whiskey and being really argumentative and causing a big family rumpus. I remember a client saying to me recently that she could now make much more mess and more noise and have more fun because her ex wasn't going to be there with a big black bin bag collecting up all the wrapping as soon as anybody had opened anything. Whatever it is, make a list of all the things that you won't miss and think about the things that you can start to do instead. My next tip would be to focus on what you can do rather than what you can't. So it's really, really easy to fall into the trap of focusing on what you can't do and to sink into feeling low. So instead, twist that around and ask yourself what you can do. So I remember working with a client a couple of years ago who came to a session. It was quite late in November and she was really upset because they'd worked out their Christmas plans and she was worried that her son, who was about 5, I think, would be with his dad for Christmas that year. It was the first time. So she was really distraught about this and spent, the first 10 minutes of the session in tears, saying that she knew that she was just going to be home alone for Christmas and it would be really miserable. And she'd kind of bought into that story that she was telling herself. So I asked her, what could you do this year for Christmas that you wouldn't be able to do if your son was with you? And she said, immediately almost, that she'd always wanted to join in with the Boxing Day horse ride from her local stables, and it goes along the beach and they canter through the waves, and she'd always really fancied it. But since she'd had her son, that hadn't been a possibility. She also then said, I've been invited to my friends as well for Christmas Day, and she and her husband, I know they'll be good fun and they'll make me really welcome, and I know I can have a few drinks and I can stay over. So we talked about what she could do. And she decided she could A, accept the invitation from her friend, and B, she could book herself onto this Boxing Day ride. And she did both of those things. And she messaged me after Christmas to say that she'd had a really fantastic time and that she'd really enjoyed herself, and that she was really glad that she had taken action and done those things. So I think it's really important to remember that you always have choice. If you're dreading Christmas, perhaps the first thing to do is ask yourself, what is it that I'm most dreading? Is it waking up by myself? Is it that I need to spend the day alone? Or is it something completely different? So be really honest with yourself about what it is that you're afraid of. And once you know what that worst thing is, you can start to think about what choices you have to overcome that part. So even if you're going to be on your own, perhaps at Christmas, you can choose between, I don't know, for example, staying in bed and eating loads of crisps and staying in your pajamas all day, or you can choose to go out for a long walk, perhaps leave your favourite dinner in the oven to have when you come home. A friend of mine last year decided that because she was on her own at Christmas, she was going to break with all traditions and she was going to eat beans on toast, take the dog for a really long walk and watch her favourite movie in the afternoon. And the movie had nothing to do with Christmas whatsoever. If you don't want to be on your own, think about the choices that you have then, perhaps. Perhaps you have other friends who are going to be by themselves. Perhaps you could get together for lunch. Perhaps you could even bring a separate dish each and put them all together. So some of the choices that I've made in previous years over Christmas are, one year I went to Morocco for a week, which was lovely. There was no sign of Christmas there at all, apart from one blow up Santa Claus, I think, in a very random place outside a bakery on a main road. But other than that, there was no Christmas at all. I've also had Christmas lunch with friends. I've had Christmas Day as well with my children on a different day. So you can choose to have Christmas on a different day. Remember, the 25th of December is just one day, and you could have your Christmas on the 27th or the 29th or the 17th. So my boys and I have had Christmas Day on all kinds of different days around the Christmas holidays. And in fact, their main question now isn't well, after whose house are we at this Christmas, their next question is, and when's Christmas for us this year, if they're not with me. So remember, you always have choices. Another thing that you could do is to create some new traditions. So you could do things differently. Sometimes when I talk to people, they talk about things that they feel they should do because they always have done. There are traditions that they've always done and they feel they should carry them on. When people start saying the word should to me, it kind of is a little red flag. And I think, who says you should do that? And what could you do instead? When you change your should to a could, it opens up different possibilities. So think about challenging yourself when you think, oh, I really should do X, Y, and Z, and start to think about how you could do things differently. So thinking about a client who did something differently last year, she had two, I think their children are about 11 and 9, and every year until now they have always done their sort of stockings in the parents' bed and opened the stockings there. This year that wasn't going to work. This lady's ex-husband was coming round on Christmas morning, but she didn't want to do that anymore, obviously. So she created a whole new tradition where the stockings were downstairs in the kitchen. They had some Bucks Fizz. The children had some non-alcoholic Prosecco, and they opened their stockings over a really lovely breakfast of smoked salmon and all kinds of things. And the children actually said afterwards, we really preferred it that way, Mum. Can we do that next year? So try creating some new traditions and do things a little bit differently. Christmas is full of weird and wonderful traditions, and maybe you've got friends who have always done things differently to you and you'd like to try it their way for once. Or perhaps your ex had traditions that you really didn't like and you didn't enjoy or look forward to. So I had a client whose ex-wife insisted on having dinner at 1 o'clock so that she could watch the Queen's speech, or the King's speech, I guess it would be now, on the dot of 3 o'clock. That meant that the morning was really stressful. It started early with all the cooking. And once he no longer had to take that into account, he created a new tradition, and he used to take a really long walk after breakfast. Then they would do presents, and then they would have dinner much later in the afternoon when it was dark and they couldn't really go outside. So when you introduce something different or you change your routine around, you avoid that kind of comparing to Christmas past, and you might even create a tradition that you really enjoy. Another really good question to ask yourself, what's the best gift I could give to myself this year? And I talk a lot about being kind to yourself and having compassion to yourself. So just ask yourself this question. Now, it doesn't have to be an actual gift. It could be the gift of some time, or it could be the gift of doing something that you really enjoy. So perhaps take a piece of paper and jot down any ideas you have, however crazy they might seem, and then start to think about how you might be able to do some of those things. So perhaps for you, it's the gift of time to read the new novel that you've asked your mum to buy you for Christmas, or perhaps it's the time to take a really long walk in the countryside with your dog that you can't do when the kids are with you. You can do whatever you want, but give yourself a really lovely gift this Christmas. Do something kind for you. And children, I spend a lot of time talking with clients about children and Christmas, and I really strongly believe that your children will follow your lead. So if your children aren't with you for part of the holidays, how can you focus onto the time that you do have together rather than the time that you don't? And your children will take their cue from you. So if you are down and negative, they will be as well. If you're angry and resentful, they're likely to feel perhaps conflicted and stressed. So when you're upbeat and you make plans to do things that you'll all enjoy in the time you're together, they'll do the same. And you can even make this into a really nice activity, perhaps, and sit with the children one afternoon with a big piece of paper, and you could brainstorm things that you and they would like to do over the Christmas holidays. I'm taking my kids this year to Stowe to go and see the Christmas lights, and we're going with another family. We're going out for a meal in the pub first, and then we're going to go on to Stowe and wander through these beautiful, beautiful lights, and that's going to be the start of Christmas for us, and we're all really looking forward to it. So yeah, get some ideas about things that the children would like to do, traditions they'd like to start, and then focus on planning those into the time that you have with them. And like I was saying earlier, even if you don't have the children with you on Christmas Day, remind yourself Christmas Day is just one day, and you can have a full-on Christmas on a different a different day. Turkey, trimmings, stockings, family over, whatever you want to do. And last year I asked my, he's now 18, I asked my 18-year-old how he feels about Christmas. And he said, it's great, we have 2 Christmases. They get 2 lots of presents, they have 2 lots of Christmas dinner, they have 2 lots of fun. And what kid isn't going to want that? If you are struggling perhaps with time that the children are going to be with your ex over the holidays, one thing that I'd advise you to do is to put yourself in their shoes. And I do this exercise a lot with clients. This involves closing your eyes and really imagining that you are your children. You're literally standing in their shoes. You're seeing, hearing and experiencing things from their perspective. And it can be quite challenging, but it's really worth doing. So ask yourself, how do I feel? So as your child, how do I feel? What is it that I want? And what message would I give my mum or my dad about Christmas this year? Most children just want to be able to see both their parents, have fun with both of them, and be free to love you both. So put the children's interests right at the top. No child wants to see their parents arguing about where they're going to spend Christmas Day. And in the long run, they'll probably remember that arguing for many more years after they've forgotten which house they were actually at for that particular Christmas. So it's about looking at the bigger picture. If you are perhaps spending time with your ex-partner this Christmas, then if you can, be kind to each other. Perhaps remind yourself of just one good thing about them before you get together over Christmas. Zip up your kind of Teflon suit. The Teflon suit is a special suit that repels negativity or negative comments or nasty words. Take a step back from the emotion and perhaps try and put your differences aside over Christmas. Maybe you can both agree that you're going to put the divorce proceedings on hold over Christmas, or you're not going to talk about them. If you're struggling, make a really conscious decision to respond rather than react. Breathe, pause, and slow down your reactions. Because although you can't control your ex, you can control how you respond to anything that they do or say, and you can take the heat out of the situation. So one of my favourite mantras that I talk about a lot: stop, breathe, think, respond. If you are perhaps seeing your ex-partner over Christmas and you're worried about it or scared of how it might go, then you can actually use your imagination to help you. So your brain doesn't know the difference between what you imagine and what you remember. So you can prepare for spending that time with your ex-partner by becoming what I call being the Steven Spielberg of your own mind. And you can use a mind movie to prepare for those times when you know you'll have to be in the same room or spend time with them. So what you do is you sit comfortably and you imagine the scene and you run it through in your mind like a movie, with you watching it on a big screen. And you see yourself in that movie. And you imagine yourself perhaps zipping up your Teflon suit, being composed, saying exactly what you need to say, acting confidently, calmly, and behaving exactly as you would want in an ideal world. And you could rehearse what you want to say out loud if you wanted to. And then you rewind the scene back and you run it through again. Only this time you see yourself even closer to the screen, and the screen is bigger, the colours are vivid, the colours are brighter, the picture's bigger, and the noise and the sound is louder and clearer. And you run that scene through again, watching yourself as confidently and as calmly going through that day or those hours, and behaving exactly as you want. And then you rewind it again. And this time you step into the scene. You're no longer watching now. You're part of the movie in your mind. And you keep repeating it over and over and over until you feel completely in control of that scene and that you have behaved in the very best way that you can. And then notice how that feels. Notice that now you'll know what you want to say. You'll know how you want to feel, and you'll know how you want to act. And then when you meet your ex-partner and you have to spend that time, your brain will remember your mind movie, and it will think that you've already done this, and it will know what to do. And that will help you to feel more confident. So I'll stop there for a second. There we go. So in the end, my big message really is it takes as much energy to worry about Christmas, to stress about Christmas, as it does to plan for how to make it better and to take control of your choices around how you feel about Christmas. And the key really is to shift your focus, to concentrate on what you can do rather than what you can't, and to try and make the holiday as good as it possibly can be. It might not be perfect, it might not be exactly what you want, but you can make the best of it, and you can make it as free from stress as you can. And you never know, you might actually create a tradition that you enjoy along the way. So thank you for listening. I will stop talking now, and I don't know if there are any questions, or if any of the lawyers or Steph, if you've got anything else that you want to say in addition to what I've said already. What are some of the common legal things that come up, Rachel, Amy?
So over the Christmas period, there's quite a lot of clients and parties ringing up about the arrangements, and if one party is saying I'll do X, Y, and Z, and then they don't do it, and that can cause sort of quite a lot of distress for a lot of our clients. So I think the best thing to do is to try and agree the arrangements and come up with a plan. But if one party is saying, I'm not able to do that, or I'm not willing to do that, then the difficulty is you both have got parental responsibility. There's no court order stating what should happen and when it should happen. And the reality is, what you don't want over Christmas, quite rightly, Claire, is to have a conflict. So if one party won't return the children, and one party decides I'm going to go over and get them, all it's going to do is cause a conflict. Likely the children will witness it and could end up in the police being called, and the poor children just sort of in the middle. So I think that probably the best thing to do is to, obviously if the children are at harm, then it's really important that you contact children's social care or the police if you feel that they're at risk of harm, because that's something slightly different to just we can't agree the arrangements. And I think it's really important then to contact a lawyer who can then maybe write to the other party to say, look, this is the position. We don't trust that you're going to be adhering to the agreement. We're really concerned you're not exercising your parental responsibility in the right way, and just saying that we really need some assurances as to what's happening moving forward, to try and you sort of narrow those issues and try and agree it really. Rachel, I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
I entirely agree with everything you've said. I think the only thing I would add is to try and make those arrangements as early as possible, and to give you as much time as possible to get those arrangements in place, just in the event that you do need some help from a third party to arrange things.
What's the if we've got people watching now who haven't got their arrangements set out yet, and they know that it's probably going to be quite a difficult process to go through, we're already, I can't remember what the date is now, but we're already into, it's the 7th, is it today? Yeah. On the 7th of December already. Is there enough time even now to use any of those legal routes?
Certainly, if you needed, say, a solicitor to write on your behalf to your ex-husband, ex-wife, then there's time for that to happen. But if things couldn't be agreed that way, you're highly unlikely to get anywhere near a court at this stage. And it might be, if you were both willing, that a mediator might be able to offer you a session. But, at this point in the month of December, the clock's ticking. So, sooner rather than later, I would say, if you do need any third-party assistance.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you. So it's a question. So how early would you recommend planning Christmas? I mean, I always, from my perspective, in the past, my kids are older now, so we don't have to do it quite so carefully, I don't think anymore. They tend to do a lot of their arrangements themselves now. But when they were younger, I used to always start thinking about Christmas middle of October, that's when we would start emailing about Christmas plans, to try and get those in place at some point during November. So I don't know, what are your views on that?
I think certainly if you're not kind of in a pattern, you know, if it's your first Christmas, say, of sorting out these arrangements, sooner rather than later. But I think once you get in a pattern, probably you're right, Claire, you know, that come October, it's just a case of really fine-tuning the dates, I suppose. But, you know, with a lot of clients, particularly if we've been in court proceedings, then, you know, I would say sooner rather than later. You know, if you can agree all holiday dates by the 31st of January or as early on in the year as possible, then you know, that's the best way to give you time if problems do arise, but also for you both to know where you are for the year and for the children to be clear about what they're doing.
Yeah, and one of the things that is so discombobulating about when you're going through a divorce all the years after is the lack of certainty. So if you can agree on a pattern that's going to carry on forward, you know, alternate years or whatever it is that works for you, I think that's a really good idea. We always did alternate Christmases, but I know other people who split Christmas Day in half and all kinds of things. So, you know, I think the other thing is, don't feel that you have to do what everybody else thinks is the norm. So I have friends as well who, despite the fact that they're divorced, they still get together on Christmas Day and spend the day together, and that works for them. So do what works for you and your family. I think is an important thing to remember, not what everybody else thinks you should do.
Yeah, I agree, Karen. And actually, my family situation where my dad would spend every Christmas with my mum and my stepdad, and that was great for us, and it's sort of out of the norm, but it was nice growing up that I could have, you know, all my family together and they got on for that day, and that's, you know, that should be encouraged if possible, I think, unless there's a reason why that couldn't, you know, get on. And I think just following on from Rachel's, I normally say to my clients, if we can get it done after the first Christmas, the arrangements, then let's do it, and let's do it in January, and then everyone knows where they stand. So yeah, I think
actually that leads me on to another point. Actually, you know, if you have issues this Christmas, so, you know, we were talking earlier about, you know, your ex doesn't bring the children back when they're supposed to, or the drop-offs don't work as they're supposed to, etc., then in January is probably the time to start thinking about raising back with your solicitor, so you can perhaps sort it out for the following year and the years that follow. So don't bury your head in the sand. If Christmas is difficult this year, start that process to sort it out for the following years early.
Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah.
So there's a couple of questions. What if your partner keeps stalling decisions and won't stick to plans? So a partner who keeps stalling decisions, this is one of the reasons why I always say to my clients it's a good idea perhaps to put a proposal together and present it, because then you can phrase it in a certain way. So you can say, this is what I suggest. Please let me know by X date if this doesn't work for you or if you want something different. Otherwise, I'll assume that this is okay and I will plan accordingly. You know, so you can kind of put your boundaries around it in that way. So that's one way to do it. Have you seen any other ways? I guess one of the other ways is, you know, if it carries on over years, is to take it through down the legal route and get a court order setting out exactly what you want. Another route might be go to mediation as well.
Yeah,
and bring them to the table.
Yeah, I think exactly what you said. A letter, if that's not working, mediation, if that still doesn't work, then sadly it's a court order, which we don't want to do, but it might just be necessary for sort of consistency and routine for those for the children. And obviously, as per parents, you need to know what's happening.
Yeah, thank you. So another question, what if your finances are different? How do you manage it when the other one buys lavish presents and days out, but you can't afford it? So I've seen this come up a few times. And the thing I always say is, the important thing to remember, I think, is that ultimately children, the most valuable gift you can really give them is your time and spending time with them and doing stuff that they enjoy. It doesn't need to be expensive, potentially. It doesn't need to be, you know, really lavish days out. So try and avoid that compare-itis in terms of, you know, your ex-partner is giving them a really expensive bicycle and you can't afford to do that. So just try not to compare yourself to them, and try to put aside, I know that can lead to resentment, but trying to just put that aside, and talking to the children about your ethics behind it. So talking to the children about how, you know, you love spending time with them and how important it is to you to spend time with them, so that you're instilling that kind of thought process in them. And is there anything that either of you would add to any of that? Or Steph, of course. Please do join in, Steph, if you've got anything.
I think depending on your kind of communication, you know, the communication levels between you, in terms of you know, finances being different, that kind of thing. I think if you're able to agree an approach as to, well, look, you know, this, you know, be honest and open about it. This is the situation. You know, and probably if you've been through divorce or separation, they're going to have an idea about funds you've got anyway. So if you can agree a way to deal with it, you know, so that your Christmases are not on, you know, entirely different, you know, polar opposites, then that's something to think about, I think.
Yeah, and also, you know, if the children notice these things, then you can absolutely hear what their feelings are about it, and listen to how they feel about it, and then talk to them about sort of more general kind of ethical considerations, like we were saying just now. Yeah. So somebody's just saying that, yes, they haven't got any small kids, but first Christmas that they're not together after 17 years or so. So your daughter's going to be with you and you want it to be good for her, but you know you'll be sad and trying to hide it. Sometimes I think it's okay to say, you know, just say, I'm feeling a little bit sad today. How can we work together to make this as enjoyable a day as possible, and have that open communication with your daughter. It's an adult daughter. So yeah, have that communication with her. Talk about how would you like to organise your day? What have you always wanted to do differently? What new things could you do? How could you make it so that it's the best day possible for you both? Acknowledging that, yes, there will be those sad feelings. You know, none of what I'm saying is to say push those feelings aside and don't acknowledge that they're there. Just don't let them stay around and spoil your day, perhaps is my message, really. So blended families. So yes, blended families is interesting. So I've been in this situation too with blended families and different family pools. So you might have, let's say, you know, if you have a new partner and they have children, and you have children with your ex-partner, and they also maybe have a new partner and there are children there too, it can get really quite complicated. What I'd say in that situation is work out what you would like first, and then try and sort of stick to your boundaries around it, so that you're not traveling here and then traveling there and then traveling here and then traveling there, and then spending, you know, Christmas running around and feeling exhausted at the end of it. Try and take some time when you can just be quiet and have some downtime. And again, open communication, open those communication channels as early as you possibly can. I think is the way to go. So there are I'm just thinking some other questions that clients of mine have had before. I had somebody the other day ask me about her friend is going through a difficult divorce and what can she do to support her over the Christmas period. And that's a really interesting question. And I was thinking back over things people have done that meant a lot to me over the years. One of them was, you know, inviting me over. So if you are able to invite somebody, a friend of yours who you know is going to be on their own on Christmas Day, if you can invite them round for part of the day, or even the whole day or whatever, just to help them feel like that they are involved in it, then do that. And also just listening and asking what they need. Is always one of the top answers when I'm asked about what I can do to support a friend. Ask them what they need, listen to the answer, and then see whether you can provide what it is that they're asking for. I don't know if anybody else has anything that they'd like to add to any of those points. No? Okay. Essentially, I think, you know, actually thinking about it, well, another thing that's come up quite often is, how can I explain to my children that when they're with their mum or their dad, that it's okay for me to do fun stuff when they're not with me, when they're away and they're with their other parent. Life doesn't just stop. And I've had a few clients ask me that as well over the last few weeks. And I think the thing is to be quite open and honest, depending on the age of the children, and just say that, you know, this is what makes me happy. This is what I enjoy doing, and I'm going to take the opportunity to do that as and when I can. And if it's something that you'd like to do, then maybe we'll program that in for later in the year, and we can do that all together. But I think it's really important that children don't think that life just kind of stops when they go away, and that you just sit at home in your chair feeling miserable. And I actually think it's really healthy for them to know that you do go out and you do other stuff, and you have friends, and you experience fun when they aren't around. Some children will worry about you, of course, and so that can be really reassuring for those children as well. If you can speak to your children, or if you want to speak to your children on Christmas Day, we've always had a tradition of whoever the children are with, the other one will have a FaceTime call at some point during the morning. But we always check with each other when is going to be a convenient time, things like that. Again, that's down to communication and so on. So is there anything else that legally comes up a lot around Christmas kind of stuff? Amy, Rachel?
The only thing I'd probably say is in terms of holidays and actually taking the children abroad.
Yeah.
Because one party might say, you know, I don't want them. I want them here because I want to, you know, have Boxing Day and you can have Christmas Day. So again, I think it's going back to, you know, the principles of trying to get that agreement, because that's really, really important, and agree it. You know, if you're planning a holiday, look in January for the December. You've got time then to negotiate, speak to a lawyer, and get a court order if needs be. And as I said, I go back to the point, you've both got parental responsibility. So you should be consulting about, you know, taking the children out of the jurisdiction. And technically you do need the other party's consent to remove them from England or Wales, even if for a holiday, especially if you don't sort of have any court order in place. So again, it's those kind of thoughts of, all right, I know I've got Christmas, but thinking about, you know, holidays and taking the children away, because that is a big issue that comes up, and it could be last minute sort of now, and then lawyers are having to sort of jump into the court to kind of get specific issue orders to take the children abroad, and we're having to say that we're going to be in difficulties maybe getting a court hearing, and it's just not fair on the children and you as parents to kind of be having all of that stress at this time of year, really.
Yeah. Is it in legal terms, is it necessary to have a kind of a document that you have with you in terms of consent to show that you've got the consent of the other parent when you take them out of the country?
It depends on the country. So some countries do require a document to say that you can, you can take the child away, but it's not necessary. So what I'd suggest is find out where you're going, and then we can look to see if anything, needs to be formally signed. I know some countries require sort of a document that needs to be certified. They're quite sort of strict, but yeah, it all depends on the country. So again, the earlier the better, because you've got time to get all those forms done.
Again, I guess if there are problems this year around anything like that, then talk to your solicitor early into the new year so that you can get all that ironed out for future. Grandparents often comes up, and in my family, certainly I've always been quite I've always taken the view that, and not everybody agrees with this, but this is my view, I didn't divorce my ex-husband's family. I'm divorced from him, and I'd known all of them for a long time. So I'm still very much in contact, not all the time and not all that often, with his sister and his brother and his dad and so on. So keeping grandparents in children's lives, I think, is really important. If you've got an ex-partner, for example, who doesn't enable the children to have contact with even their own parents, perhaps, then thinking about whether there are ways that you can do that, whether there are ways that children can stay in touch with their grandparents, even if it's not facilitated, even if that's via FaceTime or messages, and so on and so forth. Because I think it's really important that children have contact with other members of their wider family. I think this comes down again to standing in their shoes and thinking about what's going to matter to the children going forward. Somebody asking about how can I manage the guilt about the fact that I separated and that the children have different Christmases. Okay, so I would suggest that this is a reframing, something to reframe, to sort of turn on its head. How can you find the upsides in this? How can you find perhaps some of the positives in that? So it might be that they have 2 lots of presents. It might be that they get 2 lots of Christmas days. It might be that they get to spend more time with you, and then they get to spend separate time with their mum or their dad, and so on. So try and find the upsides in it. And like I was saying earlier, the children, I think, will follow your lead then on that. Mine certainly have. And Christmas isn't something that they worry about, and they enjoy having Christmas at both families. Spending Christmas together. So if you're spending Christmas together, how do you deal with any comments that might trigger you? So a few strategies here. I think one is to zip up that Teflon coat. So before you go into that period of time, imagine yourself stepping into a Teflon coat that repels any kind of negative comments or comments that might trigger you. Or, you know, literally imagine yourself stepping into it and even act it out. Step into your Teflon suit, zip it right up. Even I've had clients before imagine themselves in kind of space helmets that kind of bounce off any negative words that might come in, and practice that mind movie strategy. Maybe practice some specific lines that you might need to say in certain circumstances. So for example, if your ex-partner keeps bringing up the divorce, perhaps on Christmas Day, have a line that you're ready to say and that you've prepared. I don't think today's the day to talk about this. Let's leave it until after New Year, and just keep saying the same thing over and over again. I don't know if you can still hear me, but my computer has just gone completely blank. There we go, you're back. And now it's preparing security options. Just a second, I should come back in, cancel. Okay, I'm having technical issues my end. If I disappear, it's because my computer's doing something really odd. But yes, what was I saying? Yes, all those tips that I talked about before, zipping yourself into your Teflon suit, practicing the mind movies, and also remind yourself of perhaps just one good thing about your ex-partner before you see them, and that will help you to think about them perhaps in a different way. I don't think there are any more questions. So before my computer completely erupts and explodes, perhaps we could draw to an end. So I'd really like to say thank you to everybody for coming, and thank you as always to Stowe for hosting, and thank you to Rachel and Amy for coming along, and Steph as well. And if anybody else has any last comment to make, please do, otherwise we will finish the recording. So thank you very much for coming, everybody.